Welcome to Secrets from the Scene, a show for local musicians who want to improve their music, grow their audience, and learn about Minnesota's music scene. If you're interested in talking about all things music related and meeting interesting people from our local community, you're in the right place. Welcome to Secrets from the Scene. My name is Stephen Helvig, and I'm your host. Today's episode is going to be a good one. I have two friends, two colleagues that I've gotten the chance to work with over the years, thankfully, from the local company Hitlist. Hitlist curates music for media. They are a music house. They're located here in town, but they work on a global scale. Jim Weber and Christy Van House are industry veterans. They've been in the ad world for many, many years, and their company deals with a lot of different companies, but they're very experienced with dealing with brands, that's for sure. And today's episode, we're going to dive into kind of a niche part of sync, which is writing music for ads and how that differs from the broader industry of making music for sync. Because there are a lot of differences, both on the business side and on the creative side. Without further ado, please welcome Jim Weber and Christy Van House.
Hi.
Hey, Stephen, thanks for having us.
Great to see you.
Appreciate you guys giving me your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us. This is a great opportunity. We love sharing our oldness.
It's nice to have an excuse to hang out again because it's been a while since I've seen you guys.
It has. It has.
Yeah, it certainly has.
So as I mentioned in the intro, I've gotten to play some of my music with you guys, and we've had success over the years doing that.
Well, you make great music.
Well, I appreciate that. Shout out to my writing partner, Dan Ludke, as well. And I love this because the podcast, we highlight local artists, engineers, producers, companies. And so you guys are among my favorites partially because you've made me money.
You're making friends.
That's an easy way to feel good about promoting something. But there's more than that. Obviously, you both are great people. You've been a friend. You've taught me a lot over the years. And I'm just excited to share what you guys do with more people. So I'll pass it over to you guys. Talk about Hitlist.
Yeah. Well, we've been in this business, actually kind of came into the business around the same time, 99. The business of music for advertising was so different back then, and it's morphed and it's continuing to morph. I like to say every 10 years, the ship turns to something else. No one was really licensing real music for ads. There was needle drop and there was some production music library stuff out there, but certainly bands and artists were absolutely not interested in licensing music. That was the most uncool thing to do in the world. And, about 2010, that ship started to turn and it became much more of a licensing kind of scenario for various reasons, which we can go into detail. So Christy and I made that pivot. We started Hitlist kind of softly in about 2011. We had been working for another music house before then, a company called Heston Kramer out of town here. Bob and Steve at Heston Kramer, great guys. They taught us a lot, but we kind of saw this ship moving over to licensing and decided to try our hand at that and opened up Hitlist, and we've been at it for about 12 or 13 years now.
Wow. Walk us through who Hitlist works with, maybe a couple examples of your biggest clients or bigger placements, and how you also work with local artists to connect the dots.
Our job is to solve music problems for clients, right? Our clients are typically ad agencies, although we do work with production houses, post houses, video editors, right?
Editors, client direct.
How you get in on a job, it may come from anywhere. And so, what we discovered is that it's more valuable for us to solve the problem than to have it be our property that sells. So in other words, that you've had some real success with us, I hope, I like to think. It doesn't matter to me whether we sell my track or your track, because the win in this scenario is solving our client's problem. And however we do that, it'll work out in the end. Just to toss out some campaigns we've worked on. I mean, it's, all the tech companies, Google, Meta. We do a lot of cars. We do a lot with Hyundai. But we do a lot of small stuff. And that's the nice thing about licensing. When I talked about how the business used to be, it used to be you got the call, you did some demos, and if you won big because the client actually owns the music at the end of the day and there was a big payday. The problem with that model is that if the phone doesn't ring, you're not making any money. So what licensing has meant for us is a little bit of the quote-unquote river of nickels, which is we can go license a track for 3 weeks on a radio campaign in Green Bay, Wisconsin for $300. That's fine. but we can also go get the big, national global spot and the campaign. So it's let us kind of even out and diversify our income streams. And by diversify, I mean have different income streams from different places, which I strongly recommend any musician, any artist, any producer should be considering that, because of the big win of the big tour or the big record. Those are just so far out there that if you can have a career as a solid base, that's going to give you a better chance of having that big record or that big tour to begin with.
Yeah, agreed.
Certainly. And there's back end that comes with a lot of broadcast advertising that's very much worth doing. That probably is its own podcast, but they're certainly reaping the rewards through the performance royalty organizations like ASCAP and BMI. The more the media buy for broadcasters, radio, digital, television, there is income in the first license, and then there is income on the back end as well, which we can touch on a little bit later.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of the business differences for sure. But kind of going back to like that you guys saw this evolution of doing more licensing. Outside of that, how else has your guys' business evolved over the years?
We're driven by the opportunities that come our way. We're driven by our clients. So the way that our clients have changed is the way we've changed, which means basically schedules are cut in quarter. They're 25% of the amount of time you have to work on jobs, if even that, than you did before. It used to be
weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, when do you need that? 2 weeks from now? That doesn't happen anymore. When do you need it? 20 minutes from now.
Well, I need it yesterday.
Yeah. So, and then budgets, of course, I don't want to just say slashed, because there are real budgets out there. It's just that the diversification of the budgets has grown quite a bit, particularly because it's tied to the media buys, right? The media buys used to be television or radio. TV media buys are extremely expensive or relatively expensive. Now they go get digital ads for nothing, if they're even paid media campaigns. So you're kind of dragged to the bottom of that if I can go get free advertising on TikTok or pay pennies on the dollar to what you pay for television advertising, then kind of the whole creative process gets dragged into that kind of a budget instead of hey, we're going to go spend $6 million for a Super Bowl ad, right?
That said, we are seeing budgets rising. People are taking digital media more seriously than they really were at the inception of sort of Facebook, where you just make a post. But now that there are stories and reels and all these other things, it's digital media is acting more like a broadcast network. So budgets are starting to rise accordingly.
Yeah, well, and it's more expensive to advertise on social media than it was 5-6 years ago.
Certainly.
That's true.
And I read recently that, I think this is specifically among like Gen Z or younger, spend more time on social media than they do on Netflix.
Right.
So in terms of entertainment, most of that time is now on social media. So I would imagine the advertising dollars towards that only gets more competitive and more expensive.
Certainly.
Which brings up an interesting point about the whole creative side of this, which is, I use this word often, but there's a pendulum, right? The pendulum swings. So initially the pendulum was very low dollars, digital advertising, and now they're starting to invest more money in the creative, and the pendulum is swinging back. It also presents a unique opportunity because it's not just a 30-second spot that they're doing anymore, right? They're weaving these large-scale immersive campaigns together, and there's a lot of opportunity for music that's not just like background music on an ad anymore.
Yeah,
Adds
absolutely.
to the experience.
Okay, let's cover just a little bit more of the overview, and then we'll dive into some of these specifics. I know that you guys also have another division or a separate company for the covers stuff. That's RevArts, right?
RevArts, yes. We do. We have a partner, Mike Boris, who is a trusted friend, colleague, one-time client, who was basically the head of music at McCann Erickson in New York for about a decade. Really amazing guy. He's one of the OGs in the music supervision space. He and I have a shared love of reimagined covers. So was it during COVID?
Yeah.
I called him and said, I heard this great reimagined cover the other day. And he said, oh, if only we could just focus all of our time on doing this. And I said, well, it's interesting because the climate is such that our clients, there are no specific covers companies, right? At that time, there weren't. And you'd ask a producer, who do you call when you need a cover? And they'd say, everyone I know. And it was like, okay, well, then let's figure this out. is there a place to aggregate some really good work or produce really good work? And then we sort of branched off a couple of ideas that belong to that. So to the cover that covers idea. So yes, we have RevArts aside from Hitlist. And we also are, one thing that we should mention as well is that we do original music. Jim ends up doing a lot of audio post as well. We have our catalog and our artist representation section. We're also doing a lot of music supervision right now. What that sort of looks like, I always joke with people that one of these days I'm going to change my LinkedIn profile to say accidental music supervisor because it's not something I set out to do.
Yeah.
But it's something I really enjoy because after being in this business for so many years and producing projects from a logistical standpoint and from a budget standpoint and a schedule standpoint, this is really giving me an opportunity to be in the creative space, which is really fun as someone who's sort of been around and been in music my whole life. So it's an interesting thing. So music supervision sort of looks like people call us up and say, brands, hey, we've got a fall campaign coming up. We roughly know what the creative looks like, roughly know our budget, but we don't know how to approach music. Like, do we license? Do we do original music? Do we go find an artist? Do we put the artist in the commercial? Sort of all that stuff. So we will consult with them, help them refine their idea from a music standpoint, from a budget standpoint, and then help them do the legwork in terms of executing it, whether that means sometimes it's creative searching, helping them find the right piece of music to go along with their creative that fits within their budget. Sometimes it's as simple as, we know we want this song. Will you go to the labels and negotiate it for us, get the best price, and, clear it for all of our media that we need? And there are so many other ways that music supervision can. I'm learning new things
Sure.
all the time. People come to me with new requests that I go, oh, we haven't done that before, but we're gonna.
Sure.
So
yeah,
and that actually is really complementary work for our catalog because oftentimes I know our catalog backward and forward. I don't have to call anyone to know some great ideas in every creative execution. I can always start with our catalog. It kind of ends up servicing our catalog without that being a part of the plan, but I use it as my dialogue with clients. Do you like a sound like this? Do you like a sound like this?
Mm-hmm.
This sort of organic approach seems to work for your organic brand or your eco-friendly brand or, whatever it is. I tend to pull from our catalog to demonstrate ideas, and many times it's sold.
Right.
And maybe that's a good point to kind of finish out this overview section is if you're part of the conversation in these types of jobs, the only way you're going to win, right, is to be part of the conversation. And the more conversations you can be in, the more business you're going to bring in. And oftentimes, and we just did this last year where she was working on a large music supervision opportunity, but it turned into, hey, we want a reimagined cover of a particular song. And we ended up searching a bunch of vocalists. The client approved which vocalist they wanted. I produced the track. We had it done. And so both sides can kind of interact and feed each other. And I think that's how you number one, can have some success in this field and other fields. And also you survive when the market shifts, like it is shifting again now with all things that are going on in the creative space with, AI and things like that. So be part of those conversations and then fill a need when you see one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that particular job he was talking about, it was a situation where I was called as a music supervisor. We did a creative search they knew they wanted a known song, something iconic, something people could sing along to. And they ended up falling in love with I've Been Everywhere, Man.
Yep.
I don't know if Man is part of the title, but I've Been
Which
Everywhere.
Johnny Cash made famous.
Yeah.
Right. So they fell in love with that. So then I went and negotiated the rights, knowing that they probably weren't going to be able to afford Johnny Cash's version.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, thought about maybe doing a couple of parody lyrics or changing up the lyrics a little bit. So we knew we were going to have to talk to the rights holders. So we secured the publishing for them, got all the, negotiations, clearances in place. And then we ended up doing the production as well on this recording. And it was really fun because we did it with a female, which was very different. And it was just a joy.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's get into the specific, I call it a niche, but maybe that's the wrong term for it, considering advertising is a big part of the sync world. But this area of sync, because it is different in a lot of ways versus people that are doing sync for, let's say, TV networks primarily. Advertising is a different world, both creatively and on the business side. Let's talk about how it's different, or maybe the major differences, because obviously there's overlap. But what are the major differences when it comes to making music for ads versus TV?
Well, I think, and she and I probably have interesting differing positions because I'm the one who does it, typically makes it, and she's the consumer of it. And that's something that makes her a really stellar music supervisor is she is the demographic for this music and for the advertising that will be, that will be marketing to
I'm the
a person
consumer.
like that. Yeah. I'll just touch real briefly on the creative. In one sense, it's no different than other creative musical endeavors. And in another sense, it's really holistically different. The similarities are such that it can be any genre, it can be any sound, it can be played completely on furniture, it could be anything. Anything creative could go into having a successful, piece of ad music. There are some things we don't see a lot of. I don't know that I've ever done a straight ahead jazz track. I have done a couple of country tracks now and then, but there, generally not a lot of black metal. But that's not to say it doesn't exist. So it can be creatively all over the map. As with all things, focus on what you're good at and what you do naturally, and don't try and fake it because, it has to be authentic. Really where things differ are structurally how you write, compose, and produce. And I know she has a unique perspective on this too. Dynamics are extremely important. People want tracks that quiet, loud, have ramp-ups, have fall-offs, that you can hang picture edits and build a story into.
Special moments.
Yep, moments. So dynamics are very important. A lot of times production music, they're just beds. They're just meant to be under a longer format piece, and they're just beds where the music isn't really important. A lot of cases, the music just has to do more heavy lifting than you would think of just a music bed that has one dynamic. The other big difference is learning how to write modularly, right? Because we might be cutting a 30, a 60, a 90, a 4-minute piece, and I want sections of your song that I can easily go, oh, take this 8-measure thing, make it 4 measures. Use 2 bars of an intro. It's not that you have to do that, but what it does is it makes your music more valuable and able to be used in more scenarios. And that this is a numbers game. You just want any opportunity where your music might be able to be used. You don't want to give them a reason not to use it.
Yes. The point on being able to write modularly really resonates because I think that plays into the functions and the dynamics thing. Like, to me, that's a little bit of step one. You have to understand, just like when you start writing songs, you start to understand, oh, there's structure to these pop songs. This is what a verse is. This is what a pre-chorus is. This is what a chorus is. When it comes to ads, I feel like there's similar ideas, although they don't necessarily have the terminology. But you think of having modular sections that have different purposes.
Yes.
And if you can think of having, these are the types of sections that might work if there's dialogue in. These are the kind of sections that might work if we really need a payoff. And they can be moved. One can go before or after the other one. They will transition nicely. Those are things that you start to pick up on, that when you get good at that and understand how it's going to be used by an editor, that really heightens your chances of landing a placement.
So I think one of the most important things that I talk to people about, composers about, is, and this feeds on what you were saying, you are writing for a visual medium here. And in this case, it's not just a song, right? You are specifically trying to connect with a mainstream audience, and your song needs to work as a score for a 6-second, a 10-second, a 15-second, a 30-second, a 60-second, a 90-second, a 120 or 2-minute piece. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? You have to take me on a journey. I don't need 8 bars of intro. We have to be able to get somewhere quickly because ultimately, particularly in broadcast, you got about 2 seconds of intro, 3 seconds of intro, or you start with the chorus. right? And then you take me on a journey from there. So it may drop out. It may get more tender. It may get warmer. It may get big. It may get any number of things, but I need you to bring me along on a journey. I need you to tell me a story. This is a narrative that you're writing for, basically. Now, that's not to say that there aren't occasions where a bed will work just fine, and they work fine all the time, and they license all the time. But most of what we do is pretty high-end, pretty driving, pretty infectious, catchy, and really looking to hook a viewer. Something that when a person is sitting in their chair and the TV is on in the background, they look up and go, what's going on over there? You know, that's what we're looking to do.
Yeah. Okay. I know that somebody's going to go, all right, I'm thinking of music that I've heard in whatever big famous commercial and go, yeah, but that was just my favorite artist's song. You know, that was just some hit song that they put in there. Like, they didn't write it to any of those things. Now, it can be tricky, like all things in sync, because there are just a lot of variety. You will see an exception to literally every rule.
Yep.
But so often if we look at that big famous thing and then try to draw that versus look at the other 99%, you know, and that's what you're talking to. Sure, you could go to let's say an Apple commercial and find just some trendy artist that has cultural relevance that Apple's using in an attempt to make themselves look cool in the moment. That may not follow the things that you just said. But if you go watch the other 99% of commercials that are selling dog food or cars or whatever, then it makes a lot more sense. So you can see both. But even with the big songs, sometimes you can still see that, well, that worked still. They still had the dynamics and they still had the bed that worked.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand that not always, but in a lot of cases, those spots are not only using that big famous song, there's also a boatload of sound design and sweetening going on so that, you know, you have that reverse swell that's going to take you into that transition. That wasn't in the original song. So there's a lot of tricks that are done to have the famous song, but also do all these things that Christy's talking about.
Yeah.
We can smell a contrived piece for advertising from a mile away, right? Oh, hey, I wrote a song for advertising. Advertising people tend to call us up and say, we want a song that doesn't sound like ad music, right? So it is important that a composer do something that is authentic to them, their artistry, their talent, because you're not just writing for an ad, right? You're also writing for yourself. You're also writing something that's supposed to connect to people. And if you're not connecting with this piece, then the mainstream isn't going to connect with it either, right? So it's important that you be authentic. Nobody on a commercial is ever going to want to hear about your ex-girlfriend. Nobody's ever going to want to hear about your broken heart. It's got to be positive, and it's got to connect with a wide audience. You can be any genre and connect with a really wide audience, you know? You just have to sort of have that in mind when you're writing. So what I would say is be authentic, but keep things somewhat broad, or keep an idea that you're speaking to a broad section of people and that you're looking to excite a broad section of people. And if you come at it from that point of view, it's hard to lose.
What's the ratio, best guess at least, of songs with lyrics versus instrumental beds? Or in your work, you know?
Way more instrumentals.
I mean, if it had to come to a ratio, I would say 35 to 40% of commercial music tracks have lyrics in them, broadly. I mean, I could be off plus or minus 10, but there's a lot. There's a lot that have non-lyrical vocals, right? Where they're using vocals as just pads or vocalizations. There's a little tricky part of business, though, of why that is, and it has to do with SAG and unions and vocalists. We can maybe cover some of that in the more detailed part of the business side.
Actually, dive into it. I'm kind of curious.
Wait, there's one thing I'd like to add first, if that's okay,
Sure.
and that is lyrics can complicate. They can take the perfect song and make it wrong creatively. Say, oh, we fell in love with this song and it's perfect. And they're saying all the right things, but they're talking about a him and our protagonist is a her, right? That simple can count it out.
Sure.
From being considered. So oftentimes what I always think of tracks in three ways. You're writing a great instrumental, you're writing a great vocal top line, and you're also writing a background vocal track that has oohs and ahs and ad libs and things like that, because those can be isolated. We can take out the vocal about the him or the her and just have someone humming along. And if that's part of the song and that's been recorded, then oftentimes we can save it from being nixed.
Right. It goes back to the modular writing aspect that you can have all three of those versions be very good versions.
Yeah.
Right.
And those non-lyrical vocals do something really, really important creatively too, which it gives it a human element. It gives it a piece of emotion. It makes it feel not just like a music bed. And it literally can draw you in as a listener, which is really the ultimate thing that needs to be done, is you need to draw the listener into the music.
And that's really helpful. In these days, many pieces don't have any organic instruments in them, right? So that's an organic element that sort of grounds the piece. Not everybody uses real instruments anymore. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah. I've done a couple pieces like that. Yeah.
Instrument. Going back to your
let's get into some of the business
question.
stuff.
Yeah. So this is just an interesting kind of anecdote of why there aren't as many vocals in ads based on history, which is, in the olden days, when most everything was TV or radio, you didn't have all this digital usage. These jobs were all run under the Screen Actors Guild. So if you were an actor in a commercial, you were paid SAG wages, you got SAG residuals. SAG residuals can be extremely valuable. Voiceover was treated like a screen actor. So was the singer on a track. So if I used a singer on a track, my client has to pay that back end, which can be huge. You know, I mean, just to give someone an idea.
Costs like actors. I mean, there's been many, many jobs that we've done where there was a SAG vocal. The vocalist made way more than we did on the project.
That, you know, back in those days when there were SAG jobs, or when everything was a SAG job, you know, the session fee was $400 and they would make 20 times that on the back end. So there was, by not having vocals, our client could save money. Right? Sure. So it's not the only reason they would not have vocals. There could be creative reasons and stuff like that. But that is a thing out there of why. And even now, to this day, we have ad agency clients who are SAG signatories who literally cannot have a whistle in a track because they would have to pay that under a SAG contract.
Yeah,
so,
and SAG contends that a whistle is a vocal.
Sure.
My engagement ring right here, it's a JCPenney ad, SAG.
That's awesome. Let's take a quick break so I can tell you about my latest offering for independent artists here at Helvig Productions. As you may know, I'm a music producer located here in the Twin Cities, and I've been running a recording studio for the last 15 years. I've worked with hundreds of local artists spanning pop, rock, Americana, and all the various forms of indie singer-songwriter music. And I know just how hard it can be to finish your own songs. It's easy to get stuck in a death loop of endlessly tweaking things, rewriting sections, or just completely starting over and never feeling satisfied. This is why I've started offering a free song analysis, which I call Musician's Roadblock Relief. If you're currently stuck working on that same song over and over again, I'd love to offer you some ideas that may help. I will objectively analyze your track and offer some helpful possibilities to hopefully get you unstuck and back to finishing that project. My feedback will cover one of the three areas where I've seen artists struggle the most. The first one is the song itself. I've had artists come to me wanting to produce a song that just isn't great. But there's no sense in spending money on a bad song because no amount of production or mixing will fix that. You need strong melodies, good lyrics, and a nice flow from start to finish. The second roadblock I see artists run into is bad production. Even if the song is good, the production needs to match the sound you want. Are the sounds right for your style? Is the arrangement too messy? How does it build? Are you doing too much or too little? When all the supporting production elements work in harmony, the song comes to life. And the last thing is mixing problems. Nothing is more frustrating than loving your song, but discovering it sounds terrible everywhere outside of your home studio. Pro-level mixing is hard, and it takes years to master. Mixing problems may be holding you back. If you've wasted enough time in the trial and error loop and are ready to try a different approach, head to helvigproductions.com/fixmysong and fill out my application. That's HELVIG productions.com/fixmysong. I'll take a look at your specific situation, and if I think I can help, I certainly will. It's 100% free and may just be the thing to get you unstuck and back making progress toward your goals.
Yeah, business topics. Where would you like to dive into that one?
Well, let's do it as in comparison to other areas of sync. For brands, for advertising, is the paperwork more difficult or is it just the same?
The paperwork is different. Is it more difficult?
It's important is what it is.
It depends on which paperwork you're talking about.
Sure.
If you're talking about artist paperwork, here's the one overarching comment I think that drives this level of detail. Let's take an idea of plagiarism. If I stole your song from you or wrote a melody that's the same as one of your songs, I plagiarized your song. If I put out my record and I go on tour in my van for that, you could sue me for plagiarizing your song, but what are you going to win out of it? You might get my van with 300,000 miles on it, right?
Right.
If Pepsi uses your song and steals your song, you can go sue them for millions of dollars. There was an era, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, where, to be perfectly honest, everyone was ripping the Black Keys off. Everyone wanted their ad to sound like the Black Keys. The Black Keys probably made more money through legitimate suing of people ripping them off than they made on the records, to be perfectly honest. Because copyright infringement is a very, very serious law with very strong precedents and very strong consequences. So for that reason, that's why paperwork is more important from our perspective, having to do with tracks and licensing, talent releases, work for hires. All of that stuff is extremely important. We don't sign tracks without them. It's a skill to get used to. And not many musicians or artists in general are really very buttoned up at that kind of paperwork because it's painful.
Yeah. I mean, for every artist that comes to us that says, no, these are my homies. We're good. We'll be good forever. We all are agreed on this and paperwork doesn't exist. I'll tell them, people get funny when there's money in the room and suddenly there's a budget and everybody's fighting over who gets what. It can complicate things quite quickly. And I've brokered many a band breakup. Let's just put it that way. You sign this paper, you sign this paper, you sign this paper, because things tend to fall apart when you have a little bit of success. And so oftentimes the paperwork, it's going to protect the artist. It's going to protect us as your sync agency or your collaborators. And it is going to protect the brand that you are working with. It is going to protect the advertising agency that you are working with. There's all kinds of reasons that, when you're putting something on television, it's going to a lot of households, right? A lot of people are going to see it, and they may see it many times. What are the chances that somebody who raises their hand and says, I wrote that song 20 years ago in my basement? That's copyright infringement. You need to be able to prove that, no, this is original. What I did was original and came from my brain, and I played it, and my friends played it, and here's all the paperwork. Because otherwise, the lawsuits, just even the filing of a lawsuit can ruin you. And they're going to come after you, the composer, and they're going to take your house or your car, So let's not let that happen.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of fear around contracts in general in the music, and to some extent, rightfully so. There's a lot of horror stories, right? But we have to do something as an industry to get more education going about some of the basics. And that's what a little bit of this episode is going to be. So we might as well pivot into that. Let's talk about paperwork. And it can be specifically the kind of things that you deal with, but that's very common for anything in the music industry, some of the stuff that we're going to touch on. But, the only thing that comes to mind in terms of trying to work towards a solution here is doing this kind of stuff. Like, let's talk about some of the basics, most common mistakes, most common misconceptions, and break down what are the fundamentals of getting your paperwork right. Whether that's to work with you guys, work with some other sync company, music house, or any other myriad of business opportunities in the music world.
Right. I think that from the outset, the point is anytime you're interacting with someone else and you have any kind of a collaboration going on where two people are contributing to something, what their contributions are needs to be defined and documented and signed. And the way we do that is with a contract. Stephen, if I bring my band into your studio and I pay you N dollars an hour for your studio, what that's doing is I'm paying you for your service and your time and materials. You don't own any of my songs. You don't own the production, unless we have a separate producer deal. That is called a work for hire. I am working you to hire for me. I'm paying you, and I have no obligation to you once that's done. Or you and I get together and we write a song together. And since we're smart business people, we realize, hey, we're in the room together. We're both contributing equally, regardless of who's doing what, who wrote how many words. we're going to just do a 50-50 deal because that's the right thing to do. We sign a collaboration agreement. That collaboration agreement would define our songwriting splits. While we're there on that collaboration agreement, we should also define what our PRO is. I might be ASCAP, you might be BMI, what our account numbers are with those, so that when one of us says, hey, I'm going to be the publishing administrator on this, I've got a single piece of paper to go look at to complete the registration of that track with the pro. And if we're really buttoned up, we also kick in and get a copyright, which we have every single track of ours, thanks to the executive producer of the world. We have a copyright on every one of our tracks, and there's a reason behind that too. But those are really the two main ones. A collaboration agreement would also define the master ownership splits of the recording. So kind of fundamentals, there's the writing aspect, that's a piece of ownership. There's the publishing aspect, that's another piece of ownership. And then there's the master ownership. And those three things all need to be defined in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a work for hire. This is when you pay someone for their service, whether it's a vocal, a musician, producer, anything really. That basically means you own whatever it is that they created, or you own whatever it is that they did for you. The collaboration agreement, again, if you and I did something together, that will sort of put everything in writing. What is the other agreement? Collaboration agreements?
There's a talent
releases.
release.
That's oftentimes when you haven't paid someone and you need them to say, yes, you can use my name and likeness, or you can use this recording that you have of me speaking or singing or whatever it is on this piece of music in perpetuity.
Yeah, think of like movie extras, or if I went and recorded a gospel choir, I may not pay them for that because it was part of the service, but I used the recording and I would need a talent release.
Right. So that they say, it's okay, you can go ahead and use this and we won't come after you or your clients for that.
Sure.
Are there any others that are?
Well, let's recap these quick for people.
Yep.
Common things are splits, collaboration agreements, work for hires. That's a good place to start. Now, splits and collaboration agreements can be the exact same thing. So it's easier to probably think of it as a collaboration agreement. You worked with somebody to write something. You collaborated on something. You put together a collaboration agreement. In that agreement, you decide on splits. And what that means is that you're deciding how much each person contributed to something, how much they own of that. And that is on the writing side and on the master side.
Correct.
Ideally, all of that is detailed in your collaboration agreement, and then you can move forward.
Yep.
If the writers have publishing arrangements, then that would need to be detailed another level of detail. That's that third party. I would say for the majority of listeners here in this podcast, in the scene, are self-represented. They're self-published. So their publishing shares are going to reflect their writer's share. And then on the master side, there could be a number of different arrangements depending on if you're including somebody else that maybe isn't a writer that's helping to get it recorded. Then you might have somebody that's on the master side that is not on the writer's side. That all is in a collaboration agreement. And then you have work for hires, and that's if you are paying somebody to do work. Really commonly, the two examples you're going to see all the time is an engineer or producer and a session musician.
Or a vocalist, something.
Including vocalists, yes. Where you are putting together a track and you hired a drummer and you paid them to come in and do this thing. Or you are putting together a collection of songs that you intend to pitch for advertising, and you went into a studio to get this done. Because of the access to lots of musicians and lots of engineers, a lot of times we're doing this as, hey, you're going to help me out. But it's important to understand that if you are going to go to sync, and this isn't just for advertising, this is any type of sync in general.
Correct.
They're going to ask, who owns this? And if you didn't pay somebody that helped you make that, whether it was on the recording side, playing and arranging, or the writing, they're going to have a claim to that unless they were paid and you have these contracts together.
Yes. Yeah. And when you license a track, when I license a track on behalf of you, Stephen, so you and I have our own agreement together saying that we call it a placement services agreement. I have the right to pitch and license Stephen's pieces of music, which we have defined. What happens then is that when my client comes to me or a brand comes to me and says, we'd like to use it on this project, I have the right then to execute a license on Stephen's behalf and on our behalf without having to call Stephen and bring him in and do all the paperwork and run around at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, right? When everybody's moving quickly. I can just do the paperwork with the agency. In order for me to do the paperwork with the agency, I have to have the right placement services agreement. We can't do a placement services agreement without those collaboration agreements, work for hires, and talent releases in place because they define the ownership. I can't license it to someone unless it is very clear who owns the track in what ways.
We will not represent tracks that don't have that stuff in place.
Pretty much no one will.
Right.
Yeah. There have been many times that we actually help people go back and find that stuff. Oh, go call this person who was on this. We've helped some people sort of untangle stuff that we felt was really well, would do really well. Or
it's hard
we're
to
friends with a lot of the people that we work with. So,
but that stuff is difficult after the fact. If you can just get in the habit of doing it when you're in the room, it's so good. I would also add that with some exceptions, signing a record deal is no different. That label is going to dig through your paperwork. They want records. They want ledgers. They want to know the balance sheet on your tour. They want to, ultimately they want to know that they're going to get what they're investing in. So this is not just for our world. It's some aspects of it are exacerbated or made worse or bigger for advertising. Anyone that's spending money on you as an artist, as a person, is going to want to know that you've got your ducks in a row.
Yeah.
It's just part of the world.
One really important thing that I cannot stress enough, as someone who goes through contracts every day, don't start by Googling a template for what you need. Do not go Google a collaboration agreement and plug in your names. Do not go Google a work for hire.
ChatGPT?
No ChatGPT either. This has a high risk of doing you a disservice unless you really understand contracting language. And I have seen so many contracts brought to me where it's like, well, I see what you've done here, but what you've done here is not at all what you meant to do.
Well, what is the solution then?
The solution is ask people for help. Ask people you know. Reach out to your community. If you don't have a community in place, call a local studio and say, I'm trying to learn about this. Would you be willing to let me take a look at the templates that you use? I mean, how else would you go about it? You can obviously hire a lawyer, but...
The reason I bring it up is that I'll push back a little bit in that I think anything is still better than nothing at all. In that at least, even if there's mistakes, you have a starting point of what you intended, because if you're not writing anything down...
No, I'm not saying don't write it down. I'm saying don't Google it.
I agree with you.
Big difference. I say write it in your own words.
Okay.
On a piece of paper.
Sure.
Here's who owns the master. Here are the percentages each person owns. Here are the percentages each publisher owns. We are signing it on this date. We are in this jurisdiction, Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA, and say we all intend for, this to carry forward in perpetuity unless a written amendment exists with every party signing it.
Yes, I agree with that.
But
I also think...
He is my husband. He has to say but.
No, I think there's another way to solve that issue, which is do reach out. Like some random person that I haven't talked to in 20 years calls me and asks me for our collaboration agreement. No, I mean, we paid a lot of money for these things and they are rock solid legally. But someone who we're collaborating with, someone who's, wants to work with us and I see a future working together, we'll share those. That's not a problem at all. And I have the feeling that a lot of people in our position would be willing to share theirs too, because it's for a common good. It's a collaborative spirit of working together, helping people, lifting everyone up. And that's one of the best business approaches just in general, is that kind of approach to doing business. Is, again, it goes back to like, I don't have to win the job. I'd love for you to win the job. I want you to win the job so you can go make more music so that we can all, lift all the boats up. So that's another way that you could do that, in addition to, yes, plain English. Don't try to be a lawyer. Here's another idea that's great for everyone kind of coming up in the industry is go make a friend who's going into law school. Why not? Go find somebody who's interested in entertainment law and be friends with them and network with them and see if there's ways you can help each other out. And all of a sudden that person's going to look over your gig contract too and tell you how screwed up it is.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And it doesn't have to be a lawyer, but it just has to be someone that understands contracting language and the kinds of things that need to be in a contract. A paralegal, somebody that just really understands that world.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the higher quality of help you can find, the better. But I'll still say that I think trying to do something at the start is still better. You don't need to go necessarily find a full-fledged contract that might get you into more trouble than you were intending. So I get your point there.
Right.
But I think that there's some pretty easy resources like co-signed, where if you look at like a collaboration agreement there, a split sheet there, they're simple. It's free, and that gets you stuff wrote down. You know, you can do these again, you know, if you need to. You can always make a new contract as long as everybody resigns. You know, particularly for work for hires, like if you let a lot of time pass and then you circle back when there's money on the table and, hey, we need to pay for that, I kind of think you still might be better off trying to find something.
Yeah, there's so many subtleties to this because work for hire is actually in the Constitution. That's why work for hire has to be so legally sound, because it is defined in the Constitution.
Okay.
So while, yes, you can certainly write your own, I would say on that one, really have a good idea. The good news there, though, is that there's nothing specific to music in a work for hire, right? Where there is on a songwriting collaboration agreement, there is absolutely nothing specific to music.
Okay.
So you can find any industry's version of a work for hire, and those should be widely available by not Googling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes too, I should just throw this in. I was thinking about NDAs. We do a lot of NDAs with people.
Non-disclosure agreements.
We do a lot of NDAs because a lot of the projects that we work on are top secret. In a lot of cases, we have signed an NDA. We aren't even allowed to communicate it to you what's going on.
Sure.
Sometimes we're not even allowed to talk about it after it's aired. Things can get very tight legally. So like our placement services agreement has a confidentiality clause that basically says like, unless I give you permission to talk about a project, you can't talk about it because it gets that way. So NDAs, those I don't mind Googling so much. I just like to see them be mutual. I will not disclose your secrets, but you also will not disclose my secrets.
I would take that further and say don't sign a non-mutual NDA.
Yeah.
Unless you really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Any other paperwork that is super common that bands struggle with, artists, composers?
Not really paperwork that exists between us and other artists. That's pretty much it. I would say that, general business administration topics are important that a lot of people just don't want to do. And that is be an active self-publisher if you're going to be, right? There's very successful independent publishing entities, whether that's a single artist representing their own material or representing other people's material. So getting familiar with ASCAP and BMI, CSAC, if, in other countries have their own PROs. Yeah.
I would have to say a lot of the PROs have really detailed instructions, like almost manuals on their website about how to publish. I mean, they can basically tell you everything you need to know about how to publish and how to register, how to make an account, how to make a writer account, how to make a publisher account, which you need both of in the case of ASCAP. In the case of BMI, you only need one account. But it will tell you how to register your songs and obtain ISRC codes and ISWC codes and all the things that publishing entails. A lot of it can be found without even logging on to the ASCAP website.
And I think if you're a person who has a mind for that kind of stuff, why not be the person in your social group who just owns it and takes it on? Help other people out. There, you just formed your own little publishing company. Publishing is one of the most valuable entities on the earth. It just simply is. And it has long-term value. So with any of these skills, if you excel at it, why not open it up to helping other people do it? Because guess what? They're going to have a skill that you either don't have or don't want to have that maybe they can help you with.
Sure. Yeah. This actually brings up another thing, and we can tie this into maybe how your guys' business model works a little bit, because that's another difference with other sync companies. In that you guys do non-exclusive representation that fits into your business model. There's a lot of sync companies that only do exclusive representation. And knowing that and understanding what that means for the types of songs that you're writing and the long term of all of that. Because, for instance, if you were going to write an album for a production music library that was intended more for like the TV landscape, then you don't register those songs because that's going to be an exclusive thing. So all of those differences of, okay, yeah, but then in that case, you actually would be doing yourself a disservice if you get them registered because you're signing them over exclusively to a publisher and they're going to register them for you, whereas that's not what you guys do. Talk a little bit about your business model.
We are non-exclusive, and by that I mean, we have a placement services agreement with you, like Christy said, and in that it says this is a non-exclusive agreement. What that means is we do not have the exclusive right to represent your music. You can go have anyone else represent it. You can go license it to a movie, a TV,
if Pepsi
show.
Calls you directly and says, hey, we found your song and we want to license it, you can directly license it to them without involving us.
Of course, you may want to hire us.
I was just going to say, you might still want to hire you.
But here's the caveat with that. And that is all of the artists that we work are not out actively hustling ads and working with other ad houses like ours. If you want to go place with another non-exclusive agreement with a company like ours that focuses on ads, I would say go with the best company that you think has the most possibility of success. But I don't want to be shared with another company that goes for the same jobs that I go for.
Right.
And here's why. Because if your song shows up on my client's desk from 2 different places, that's bad form. And it actually creates problem for my client who then doesn't know who to call, right? I don't ever want that to happen. So it's just like, hey, if you want to go with another ad house, just go with the other ad house. I can't muck up my business. But in the end, most people don't do that. Most people are with a company that focuses more on television or movies or games. What's interesting is that even 10 years ago, those were all very different agencies. You had an agency focused on TV, focused on movies, focused on games, and then people like us focused on ads. Now, because of the kind of the lack of growth of the business, if not even the kind of the lack of business, everyone is fighting for everything they can get. So all the TV guys are doing ads, all the ads guys are doing TV. So it gets a little murkier. But, I just want to be upfront with people. And we talk about that before we'll ever take your material on. It's just like, know what you're getting into. I'm not going to tie these up exclusively, but I just don't want them spread out over every single ad sync agency around.
Yeah, that's also a good way to have confusion, such as having 2 sync agents working in the same sort of space. It's a good way to have a song show up on a Coke spot and a Pepsi spot at the same time.
Yeah.
Not good form. It's a good way to really make your clients angry, frustrate them.
Both of those clients would never work with you again.
Yep.
They'd never work with the sync house again.
For sure.
That's a deal breaker.
Yep. One thing I'd love that I think is really important to talk about to somebody that wants to submit or work with a sync agency is metadata. Don't ever send me a file that doesn't have metadata in it, either in the file name or if you have a program that you can, such as www.disco.ac, you can get it very inexpensively and you can inject metadata in there. I don't know, can you still do it like in iTunes or?
Well, metadata is the information that comes to the file. It depends on what kind of file you're sending.
Yeah.
So an MP3 inherently has a container built into the digital file that can hold metadata, whereas a WAV file does not. A WAV file cannot hold any metadata, so the only data that's attached to it is the actual file name that's being sent. Whereas an MP3, you can have a file name, but then when you open it with a player that can read the metadata, that might have different information in it from what the file name is. A lot of times the file name is the song name, and then you're also going to see it, but it wouldn't have to be. You could, when you have metadata, the MP3 file could be called table, and then when you load it up into a program like Apple Music or whatever, then the actual song name, the album, the artist, all of that will show up because it's now reading the metadata. WAV files don't have that. So you just have to understand how the file systems work. That's one of the benefits of MP3s. And so if you want something that's lossless, like a WAV file, then you do need to use a program like Disco. It's a browser. It's a player on the internet. It can hold metadata then because you can enter it in manually. Same thing when you upload your music to the distributors. If you're using DistroKid or CD Baby, TuneCore, or whatever, you're uploading WAV files. They actually don't have any information. So that's why they make you put in your artist name, every track's title, checking all that spelling, because they're going to put the metadata into their programs, into their databases for people to get, but the file actually doesn't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to be clear, metadata is typically it's the title, the artist name, the album name, the year recorded, all of those things that we kind of know about from Napster forward to today. But there are other fields of metadata that we deal with that are specific to our business. We might tag it with all of the emotions that song represents, obviously the genres, the subgenres. We'll tag it with what instruments are in there. We'll tag it with the BPM.
Here's why we put so much information in there is because when we submit these to clients will pass them around, they'll try them out up against their edit, they'll audition them in all kinds of different ways. And an editor may say, oh, this isn't right for the track, for this project, but it's still sitting on his hard drive. And 6 months later, he may have a project and go, oh, there was that one song that we listened to for a couple other, let me pull that up. Let me see if I can find that and pull it up. So they pull it up, they throw it on the project. It works. Everybody loves it. They want to license the track. There's no metadata on it. He doesn't know who to call.
Yep, that's a very real scenario, and
It's happened many times.
It could be 6 months, or it could be 10 years later. They pick that track up again, right? So the more you can think through and anticipate what could possibly go wrong, the more value you're going to add. It's just part of the world.
Yeah.
Well, I like getting into metadata. Let's skip over to, I kind of think, the last section here of how does somebody work with you? And to get to that point, what are the things they need to know? I think metadata is, let's say, number one. Have your stuff organized with as much information as possible. But what are the common problems that happen, and how can people avoid them if they decide, hey, I want to send you some of my tracks?
Don't send me an email with an MP3 attached to it. People reach out in all different kinds of ways on our website, via email. We're a small company. Hitlist is he and I and friends that we bring in to help us or scale as needed. And we're people. We don't like our inboxes to be jammed up with large files. So if you're going to send us something, send us a link to your Dropbox or your Google Drive or your wherever that may reside, or even a download link so that it doesn't block up my files. The other thing is I always really appreciate it when someone sends me like a human letter and says like, hey, here's how I found you. Here's how I know about you. Here's so-and-so told me about you, or I stumbled upon you on LinkedIn, or, I saw one of your projects and I saw you credited and I thought it was a great project and I felt like, I wanted to work with you, or whatever the case is. Just write a human letter that says like who you are and what you're doing, what you're hoping to do. A lot of music that we get submitted to us is not appropriate for what we do.
Yeah.
So most importantly, what I would say is don't send us anything that isn't brand friendly, or I guess that's a hard thing to say. I would say, well, I'm sorry. You look like you were about to finish.
Well, explicit lyrics.
He's really good at finishing my sentences, by the way.
Explicit lyrics. It doesn't do us any good. What are we going to do with an explicit lyric? So if you don't have clean versions, we really probably can't help. Right. So that's a good example of something that's not really usable.
Now, if we like you and we think you're really talented and we think you're really good and there's some potential there and it doesn't work for us, there may be someone in our network that we can introduce you to. But I would just say research us. Research what the kind of work that we do. Take a look at our website, read it thoroughly. It's always nice when people say like, hey, what's the protocol for submission? Just ask that and I'll tell you. It doesn't have to be hard, but if you make a bad impression with your first email, it's hard to recover from that for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Just so you know, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails coming in every day. I mean, we have such a volume. And so that's why being concise, being human, having your music organized in a place that's easy for us to access is really important.
There's a couple of technical aspects that we need to deal with, which I'll leave for that. But I would say, to your point of delivery mechanisms, I get a lot of text messages that just say yo with an audio file in it. Like that, I don't even know who it's from. Just be respectful of the people that you are communicating with, no doubt. On the technical side, if you lost your hard drive last year, I can't do anything with it, right? When we take delivery, we want any version of the track that you have. So if you have produced a separate instrumental with the full vocal track. You may have the movie score version of your track. We'd like all those mixes, but I work from stems, and stems, you also hear the word splits, are just a very specific thing. It's that I've got separate files, all synchronized from the same starting point for the drums, the bass, the guitars, keyboards, strings, lead vocal, backing vocal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want the multi-track. I can't use your Pro Tools session, but I need those stems cut out. And I'm very happy to talk to people about what those are and lead them through it and talk about what's the most efficient way to do this in your workstation. But we need those before we'll put your tracks online and rep them.
And let me just say that sort of helps us work modularly as well.
Mm-hmm.
If the client says, I don't like the horn, we can just pull it out.
Yeah.
And I will never make creative changes. I will not change your mix. You know, when I bring those files up and I've got a zeroed out workstation, I should have your mix.
Yeah.
I don't want to change the creative intent of your song at all. When our client calls us and says, hey, I need this 60 down to a 30, I have to be able to do that immediately and not have to call you and say, hey, what are you doing right now?
Right.
So those are the kinds of things we would need in order to do that. I would also say on the creative side, just like try to get familiar with when you have a great track on your hands. If that comes natural to you, great. A lot of people, that just naturally comes to them. A lot of people, myself included, because I'm a creative person, I have a very difficult time knowing when a track is great. And sometimes I have to go away from it for 4 days or 4 months and come back to it and say, wow, that was cool. Try to exercise that muscle, because that's going to keep you from sending stuff out or delivering stuff that just isn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in all fairness, I've gone through periods in the first 10 years of my career of doing this, where I had several people literally just say to me, that's not good enough. And while that's hard to hear in the time, that's also what creates your ability to get to good enough faster. And that's the whole point. Don't be afraid to scrap something that you've been working on for 4 hours and just throw it away. Move on.
And
right?
Jim does that all the time. He'll be working on something for a week and he'll be like, I'll hear him come up, you know, I'll hear what he's working on. And then later I'll say, how's that track going? He'll go, oh, I started over. It was no good.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it to go anywhere the right place. But then sometimes he walks in, you know, he'll go into his studio for an hour and come out and go, I just wrote the one. It's going to win. I already know it. You know, it's just, he has a great internal vibometer for what's going to hit. You know?
And another tangential skill, and I know I'm going off into the weeds on you here, is don't get so attached to your work. It's not you. You are not your work. Separate yourself from your work and you will have a much more objective feeling about it. Now, I understand I wouldn't expect Bob Dylan to separate himself from his work. You know, real artists who are really, or Picasso for that matter. But for folks like me who are a little more mechanics than artists, creative artists, yeah, be able to separate yourself from your work and be able to identify whether it's good or not. And I think you'll notice a freedom that you don't have when you're so attached to how brilliant everything you do is. It will also allow you to change direction really fast. Like when I say, hey, could you make it a little more XYZ? A lot of people come back and they've moved it this much. It's like, no, I want it moved this much. And I do that with singers, like vocal production a lot of times, which is singers will often walk out of our studio going, I never knew I could sound like that. I never knew I could sing like that, because you're directing them to do something that's not them. A lot of people who, even really, really good singers, don't understand that a big part of the gig is also acting.
Yeah.
And if you get used to hearing your voice and changing muscles and understanding what that does to your recorded voice, you'll get better so fast.
Yeah. Well, let's recap a little bit of this. I think first it kind of starts by looking internally and being able to judge your own work. Just because you love it doesn't mean it's going to be good for advertising or for the TV show that you really want to be on. You do have to start having some level of objectivity. Do a little bit of market research. Does this actually work in the style of commercial you think that this company works with, and so on? Like, a little bit of that will save you a lot of wasted time, because if you don't do any of that research, and if your only filter for deciding whether or not to send it is, I think this is cool, it may not be for what you're sending it for.
Right. And it'll cut down on your feeling of rejection as well, because good music will always find a home.
Yeah.
It's just that you have to find the right fit.
Well, and
right?
there's great music that just doesn't make any sense for advertising. So you just have to think through that first, or any sense for a lot of different things. But it's great artist music. It just isn't going to work behind media so well.
Right.
Or it might just be harder to find placements for that thing. So first, just kind of look at your own stuff and then try to get your basic paperwork in order between your collabs, any work for hires that need to be completed. If you have talent release forms, that would be all helpful ahead of time, but it's okay if it's been a DIY approach, you have agreements, you have some paperwork, some paper trails at least, you could get it done after the fact. Just know that that's going to take longer.
And if you're doing business with someone, try not to completely lose touch with them.
Right.
Because in 10 years, you may have something come up.
And then send a nice email. Keep it concise, but be a human. Do research before you reach out, whether it's Hitlist or anybody else. Do the actual homework and have something, important to say or nice to say. A link that's easy, accessible with all the metadata that person may need. Don't make them ask a million questions.
Truly, if your only means of metadata is to put it in the file name, make sure your name is in it.
At a minimum, yeah. I think we can have higher expectations than that for people, but
you never know. I've seen worse, much worse.
Yeah. And then also, as Jim pointed out, make sure that you're going to have access to everything that's going to be requested if the answer to this is, yes, we love it, we want it. That means you need to have your original project. You need to have the files. Ideally, you even have the stems ready, that this isn't going to be, I can probably get those. Get them beforehand because you might be wrong about that. And again, you're just going to save yourself that embarrassment if it turns out that you can't get your own stuff cleared. You can't get access to your original files. Try to get all of that ahead of time.
Yeah, and to that point, time goes by, and you never know when something's from history will have some value. So I think it's really easy, especially when you're earlier on in your career, it's a little harder to think in terms of 10, 20, 30 years. But there are tracks of mine I wrote 20 years ago that are still licensing, and I have no idea what workstation I used. I have no idea what plugins I used. Actually, that's a lie. I can bring them all up, but you want to steer clear of that technical mess. You go from Windows to Mac. You have different plugins. There's no guarantee you're going to open up that project and have it sound the same, especially for folks using virtual instruments and you're not printing tracks with that. There's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong technically that if you have those stems, those will hold value throughout time.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for this.
Thank you, Stephen.
Conversation. I think it's been really educational for people. I've learned a few things. Before we wrap it all up, though, I do want to ask you each for one last piece of information. On the end of all these episodes, I ask people for their secret for the scene. And I want to tailor your guys's to specifically like success in the sync world. If there's something that you wanted to pass along to a young artist that's looking to get into doing sync specifically for advertising, what is one secret you would pass?
Well, certainly if you're local to Minneapolis, I would say call Stephen Helvig and record at his studio.
Thank you, Christy. I'll give you your
exactly.
payment.
I'll take payment later.
I'm going to actually quote something that I saw recently, and it's not directly related to music, but I just found it's really sat well with me in general, but it would certainly apply to this too. And it's by, who's the ancient alien weirdo? Bashar?
Bashar.
Okay. It's a great video. This guy's a trip. B-A-S-H-A-R.
Okay.
He gives these seminars, and some young gentleman stood up and said, "Tell me everything I need to know." And here was his answer. It was 3 or 4 things. At any given time, do what excites you the most. Make that choice. Choose the thing that excites you the most. Do it wholeheartedly. Do it without reservation at all. Dive absolutely in and expect no real return from it. And if you constantly do that at every level of your life, you will find success. It really rang to me, and it feels really true. I think it's so easy to get bogged down in wondering and, overanalyzing. Forget all that. Do what you love. Be excited about life, and you can't go wrong.
My real secret, well, not that the other one wasn't real, but I would say make friends. I would be nowhere in the world if I didn't make friends, and I feel like music is a very small community, and you rely on a lot of collaborators, and your clients are going to be your friends. Your agents are going to be your friends, and things get hard sometimes. Work is hard. You want to align with people that are going to come through for you, are going to be reliable, and, be prepared to reciprocate that. It's hard to not be successful if you aren't equipped with a team, right? A team of well-intended people on your behalf and excited to do good work with you. So I really think our whole business is built on friendships.
It is.
I agree. And that theme comes up again and again, and it's worth restating again and again that a lot of your success or failure in the music industry comes down to who you know. Talent is huge. I don't want to undervalue that at all, but who you know is a big part of it too.
It's not just like, oh, no, someone at the top, whatever that is. But it's just it's small communities, you know, and people talk, and the cream rises to the top always.
And it might be your friend that ends up getting that record deal, or you know, that big placement that then helps you. That when I say who you know, it's not just trying to meet the person that's already really, really successful. It's more about just maintaining good relationships with all the people that are trying to do this, because you don't know who's going to succeed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You can't start if you're not getting the call, if you're not part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So be part of the conversation and be true to it, and you can't go wrong.
Yeah. Well, if people want to look you up, what sort of links or info do you want to put out there?
We're at hitlistmusic.com.
Good.
We're on all the usual socials, and we're happy to talk.
Thank you again so much for
Thanks,
this.
Stephen.
I'll put that link in our show notes. I hope to see you guys again sooner than later. Maybe do this again down the line. Thank you so much for listening, everybody that's tuned in today. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, thank you so much. If you've been a frequent listener now, consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Spread the word. You know, we're just trying to showcase more artists, producers, engineers, businesses in the local community. And if you can help share it, all the better. Appreciate you guys. As always, I'm a music producer here in town. So if you're interested in doing any work, you need some recording, some mixing, mastering, whatever, feel free to contact me. My information will also be in the show notes. And I will see you next week for another episode. Thanks.